Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Fishing with James. This is episode 5 of my hand-tied jig series, and today I'll be showing you how to tie a crappie jig that I call Melon Crush. And at the end of this video, I'll be throwing it in my fish tank to give you all some underwater footage. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And as always, everything you'll need to tie this jig can be found in the description of this video. The jig head we'll be using today is a 1/8 ounce half and half black and red ProTech painted jig head, and I've gone ahead and put some 6mm eyes on the side of it. So to get started here, we're going to lay a very thin line of super glue from the head of the jig about down to the point and wipe up any excess that might be left over. Next, we're going to begin wrapping thread from the head of the jig all the way down even with the point of the hook, and make sure that there's a decent amount of thread all over the hook. Once we finish this, we're going to set our thread off to the side. Now we need to snip the tag end of the thread. There we go. Since half this jig is going to be red, I've taken a small piece of red marabou feather and wet it between my fingers so it'd be easier to work with. Now we're just going to tie it down to the body of the hook and make sure we've got a nice layer of thread wrapped down 2/3 of the way to being even with the point of the hook. Once we've got that, we're just going to repeat the same process with a similarly sized piece of green marabou feather. I'm just going to hold it to the side of the hook, make sure it's evenly sized, and again a very loose loop of thread, cinch it down to the hook, and wrap the thread all the way down to the same point that we wrapped it with the red feather, and then go all the way back up to the head of the jig. For the flash, I decided to go with some gold tinsel. I don't know, I thought it looked kind of like those tan watermelon seeds you get sometimes, so I just went with it. But now we're just going to wrap it down with thread even to the same point that we did with the feathers, and wrap all the way back up to the head of the jig, and then we're going to trim up the tinsel to make sure it's even with the feathers. And once we've got that, it's time to start on the body. And so the belly of this jig is going to be red, so I've taken some red chenille here. And so we're just going to take it and start wrapping it down the center of the hook. It's very important to keep this as centered as you can, and we're going to wrap it down to the same point we've wrapped everything else. Then we're just going to wrap all the way back up to the head of the jig. Now we're just going to take this chenille and hold it up past the head and give ourselves a little bit of extra room. You'll see why I'm doing this later. And we're going to trim it right about there. Once we've done that, it's time to start on the main body, which is this beautiful green and black chenille. So same as the red chenille, we're going to make sure it's nice and even on the side of the jig, and begin wrapping very carefully down to the same point that we've wrapped everything else. Once we've got it tied in nice and good, we're going to go all the way back up to the head of the jig, and once we've done this, we can set our thread off to the side. Once I've got the feathers nice and even, I'm just going to use the rotary function on my vise to slowly begin wrapping this chenille all the way up to the head of the jig. Since this is a little bit thinner chenille, I'm going to do a few wraps just to make sure I get the right thickness for the body. Once I have it where I want it, I'm going to take my thread and go up underneath the chenille to cinch it down to the jig. Then I'm going to do a loop by the head, another loop up underneath the chenille, keeping it even, another loop by the head, one more loop up underneath the chenille, and then a few loops up by the head just to make sure there's nothing sticking out. Once we've got this done, it's time to go ahead and trim up the chenille, being careful not to damage anything on the underside of the jig. Next, we're going to build the belly of the jig. Now this part can be a little bit complicated, so make sure to take your time. We're going to take our red chenille, making sure it's perfectly even on the bottom side of the jig, and we're just going to pull it really tightly up to the head. Once I have it even like I want it, I'm going to take my thread and very carefully make a very loose loop of thread over the chenille and cinch it down. I'm going to make sure to even it up after each time I do a loop because it's going to want to pull to one side, and it's very easy for this to happen. So once I've got it even, I'm going to do a few more loops over it and a few loops up by the head just to make sure that there's nothing sticking out, and then set my thread off to the side. Now we're just going to very carefully trim up that chenille and pull out any loose bits that want to come out. Anything that's left can just be tied into the jig just like this. Now all we have to do is complete a simple whip finish and our jig is going to be finished. So once we've got that done, we're going to pop that thread out and pull it down just like that and trim off the thread, and there we are, a completed Melon Crush crappie jig. Now make sure to stick around because in just a moment I'm going to be showing you all some underwater footage, but first I want to make sure you could get an up close look at this jig. Now the feathers are a little bit uneven, but as I've said before, I'm still pretty new at this and I'm going to be learning just as much as you guys are over the course of this series. So now let's head over to my fish tank and take a look at this jig underwater. So as with all the other jigs in this series, you can see how much this jig moves around and how much action the feathers have. Another note, in all of the episodes going forward, I'm going to be using a loop knot in all of my underwater footage, as it allows the jig to have so much more movement and action than traditional knots. It's very easy to tie, and if you're interested in learning how to tie it, I've left a link in both the pinned comment and in the description. So if you stuck around until now, I really hope you enjoyed this video. Again, if you are new, make sure to hit that subscribe button and share this video with a friend that you think would enjoy this jig. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next episode of Hand Tied Jigs.